All right, I want to run through one of my favorite versions of a stonefly pattern here. I know there's a lot of different ways to tie these, but that's kind of what we're going to end up with at the end of the process here. This is one of my absolute favorite stonefly patterns. It's kind of similar to the way that I tie my Euro nymphs too. It's a little bit of a cross between, some of my own stuff, my own creation, a little bit of the way you tie a Kaufman. So it's got a mix of some things. So I got a jstockard J20H curved nymph hook there with a, I think this is a 2.8 millimeter maybe, mounds firehole stone in there with some 6-aught brown veevus. So we'll just get that started behind the weight here. And the way that I'm going to start this is a little different than I do some of my mayflies. The tail on a mayfly, it kind of splays out a little bit, where a stonefly is a little different. They'll have a little bit more of two straight tails just kind of sticking straight out. So I like to build a little bit more of a universal underbody when I tie my stonefly. So I'm just going to do a thread base all the way down, all the way back with touching wraps. And on my way back, I'm going to run some of my thread through this weight. Just to get that locked in, I'll drape a thread wrap over the end of it, pull it tight, lock that, and then I'll continue back down for a third run. Now what this is going to do is just kind of separate my biots a little bit, make them stick a little bit straighter out, which is kind of the look I'm shooting for. So I'm going to double back my thread with about 3 wraps, put a little bit of a thread ball in between where my biots are going to go. And I'm going to pull those off of a duck quill. I don't use goose biots for any of this. I've said this in many videos. I've never understood the desire for goose biots on these types of flies. Goose biots are just too big for mayfly and stonefly nymphs. These duck biots have thinner pieces, and they represent tails way better in my opinion. So all of my mayfly nymphs, all my stoneflies, all have duck biots. That's what we're going to use here. So I'm going to get one of those cinched in. I'm not good enough to do my biots both at the same time. I never have been. So I like to line those up. Get that locked in. And we'll bring our thread wraps all the way to the front. I'll double back a few wraps just to give myself a little bit of room. And we're going to tie in this brown mid-sized vinyl D-rib. I'm going to get the tip of that tied in. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to build up a little bit of a tapered body here. So I'm going to separate my body into fourths. I'm going to go about 1/4 of the way down. Now I'm going to go about 1/2 of the way down, double it back. And now my next time down through, I'm going to go 3/4 of the way down. And the reason why I do this is I like to have a tapered underbody on all of my nymphs to minimize how much dubbing I'm going to use. I like to use a little bit more and a little bit more of some fluffed up dubbing on a dry fly because that helps with flotation. But when it comes to nymphs, I want the least amount of dubbing that I can possibly have. Helps with the water resistance, gets your flies down a lot quicker. And next order of business is going to be this golden stone colored dubbing. This is made by Awesome Possum. It's great stuff. So Awesome Possum brand and golden stone nymph dubbing. I buy several packs of this at a time. My golden stone Euro nymphs and this golden stone all use this dubbing. So I use quite a bit of this stuff. I do a lot of tutorials and a lot of videos for all kinds of flies, but this is a fly that's actually a staple in my box. I mean, at any given time, I can reach down and grab a whole bunch of these that I have tied up. Anytime I'm not sure what I'm going to tie, I just revert right to these because I use so many of them. Okay, so I just wanted to sidetrack a little while I dubbed up my thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my thread behind that vinyl ribbing, give myself one wrap, come back in front of it, and we're just going to do touching wraps all the way up our body. Sometimes you got to double back, fill in a gap or two. And the camera kind of blocks my thread, so I always got to dub up twice. Get the dubbing on there nice and tight. I don't worry too much about bugginess with stoneflies the way I do with mayflies. Stoneflies are pretty heavily armored and not anywhere near as buggy as a mayfly nymph. And when I get to the end, which is just a little less than half the length of the body, I'm going to close off my thread and I'm going to start taking some even wraps with this D-rib to kind of complete my body. We'll pull that up and get that cinched in with my thread, and there is the abdomen portion of the body. Pretty much all set. And we'll take this and get that out of there. All right, before the next thing, I'm just going to take my brush here and I'm just going to take a few quick strokes back just to kind of loosen that up a little bit. Okay, next order of business, we're going to take some of this cinnamon tip turkey tail here, and we're going to go to where the longer fibers are, because we're going to need, we don't really need it, but I like to do this all with one big feather, so I go to where the longer ones are, snip off a fairly good chunk, not too much, but about that much or so. And we're going to tie this in by the tips. The back part going to be a little bit narrower than the front. So I'm just going to align these tips the best I can. If you can keep the fibers together, great. If not, not the worst thing in the world. But we're going to cut them off to a square end. And we'll get these tied in. So lay that flat. Try to not bunch all the fibers together. You want them to kind of stay separated. So get that tied in nice and tight. And we're going to start building the abdomen, or the thorax. So we're going to go back to our goose biots here. I'm going to go up to the top and pull these right off the top of the quill. I'm going to pull these off 2 at a time. You can go through and cut all the ones that you need, but they do change in size as you go up and down the quill, so I kind of like to keep them in order. But again, that's just kind of a preference of mine. So these portion of the legs are going to be a little bit smaller. We're going to take the biot and line it up so that the tip is about halfway down the body of our fly. And we'll get a wrap on there to get that secured. And then we'll go grab the other one, put that in on the other side. And I'm sure some of you out there that can do biots at the same time can get this fly tied a lot quicker than I can, but that's just the way I do it. So we'll get a few wraps in there to get that locked in. Cut that excess off. And tighten it all up. So what we want to do is we want to take the thorax area, and you kind of want to split that into even thirds. So I'm going to end this wrap right about there. And the reason why we're going to do it in thirds is because we're going to kind of segment our wing case a little bit. So we're going to go in, just get some more dubbing on here. And the rest of the fly is pretty much just a repetitive procedure. We're just going to go through and separate the different segments and kind of just do the same thing 3 times. All right, so we're going to go and get a nice solid wrap of dubbing right where your wing case starts so that you get a little bit of depth to it. If you look at a stonefly, their wing cases are real prominent, so I want to make sure that those are kind of featured. Now to fold this over, I'm going to use a straight bodkin, not a bodkin with a hook on the end of it, and I'm just going to slip that in right here at the base where the thread meets the start of the wing case, and I'm going to fold that over. That's going to give little bit of a different look to it and add a little bit of flare out to that wing case, which is what I want. So once that's secured, I'm going to fold this back, and we're just going to do this in a way that we can just keep using the same set of fibers that I cut off for the entire wing case. Now, if the ones you have are too short or you kind of just screwed it up, really not a big deal. You can cut yourself new fibers for every portion. Really not a huge deal. So we're going to go in again, get another dubbing noodle going here. Like I said, this part's a little repetitive, but it's all worth it. This is a fly I absolutely stand by. Okay, so we'll get that wrapped in. I spilled over the 1/3 mark a little bit, but not a big deal. So again, we'll stick our bodkin in there, get that folded over, mash it down, pull the bodkin out, start with a loose wrap, straighten that out if you need to, and tighten it down. Sorry, my dog got into something and is walking around hacking. All right. Okay, so for the last segment, before I get going on the dubbing, we're going to put in one more set of legs. So we're going to go back to our biots. We're going to pull off 2 more pieces. And these ones are going to be a little bit longer. So we're going to kind of measure those out. I don't really have a definitive way to say, hey, we're going to do this, you know, a 1/3 or 2/3 of the length or anything like that. I just kind of measure it out to a length that I like to see. None of this really needs to be exact. So it looks pretty good there. We'll get the other one on the back side. Try to match up the lengths the best you can. That's another reason to use biots that are of the same size, because you can use the butt ends here at the front of the fly to kind of measure how much of the biot you're using, which you can't do that if you're using biots of all different sizes. So that's why I like to use biots that are butted up against each other on the quill. I think it just makes it a lot better. So I put a nice tight thread wrap in there to flare that biot out a little bit, and we'll go back to our dubbing. I got a little rogue piece of something in the dubbing. Get all that put on there. And some of these techniques you can see in other patterns too. I think there's some things here with the multiple wing case that you'll see in like a Kaufman stone. So at this stage, if your fibers are kind of all over the place, you can just start at the base and run a comb through it. That'll straighten them all out again. So now we're kind of back in business here. So we're going to slip our bodkin in again, fold that over, collect it all with the thread. And now we're going to do some nice tight wraps, get that locked in as firmly as we can. Try to trim this off. That'll disappear under the last step anyway, so no biggie. I want to fill in that gap a little so that my front biots don't flare all that much. I want those to kind of stick straight out for the antenna. And on that note, we're going to cut 2 more of those off the quill. So now we're going to take this, tie that in firm. We'll get another one in there on the other side. Even them up as much as you can. And we'll get the excess out of there. Careful not to cut your wing case. All right, so we're on the home stretch here. Obviously, you can see that little tuft of thread directly behind the bead, so I want to hide that. So I'm going to take a nice little thin little bit of dubbing, and I'm going to incorporate that into my whip finish. So I'm going to take one turn, and after that turn, I'm going to lock in my whip finish tool, get a couple more turns, finish that out directly behind the biots, tighten it up, and we'll get that out of there. And that is pretty much it. Really, really, really effective fly. This is, I couldn't really figure out what I wanted to do for a video today, so I figured I would just kind of go at a fly that's in my box that I use quite a bit. So this is my version of a golden stonefly. I use this primarily with an indicator nymph. One of my favorites, really effective. Very similar to how I tie my Euro version. You know, all my golden stones are pretty much tied similarly. What I also want to point out too is I used one bead in a bit of a weighted underbody on this fly. Depending on where you're fishing, if you want to increase the weight on this, I do also tie these with a double bead. So this one in the background, you can see how that front part of the thorax, see how it's got an extra bead in there? So you can butt up another bead in there and increase the weight a little bit. You can do a lot of different things with this fly, but either way, really effective. Easy to tie. Definitely one of my go-tos. So any questions or anything, as always, write in the comments. I'll respond to them, and we'll go from there.